Hello and welcome back to Continental Club, where we discuss the hottest topics in European football. It's another Friday. That means you know what's coming at you at 5 p.m. It's Continental Club, and we've got Pat and Chris with me as ever. And we're going to be discussing a big topic because Actress Banger 555 has asked, who do you think will be the most surprising move of this summer? But before we get into shock transfer moves, just a quick reminder to subscribe to Eurofootball Daily and hit that notification bell to never miss a Continental Club. But basically, the transfer rumours are still flying around. It's the only thing that's sort of keeping me going at this time. There is lots of speculation.
Keeping me going.
And, no real football, but the speculation continues. So there's some moves that have been talked about that are pretty surprising. And Chris, we're going to start with one which has taken the Football Daily team by massive surprise concerning a Barcelona player.
Yeah. Firstly, apologies for this on my chin. The camera angle is doing it no favours, is it? And I'm with two of the most, beardly, is that a word? Men on a Football Daily. So really letting the side down there. Let's talk about Arthur Melo because, letting him go would be stupid. I don't see how this move makes sense on any level. Okay, so according to Mundo Deportivo, Juventus are apparently interested in Arthur Melo. Why wouldn't they be? He's a fantastic player. And would be willing to let Pjanic go the other way in order to facilitate this move. Now, we know that Barcelona have been long-time suitors of Miralem Pjanic, don't we? They've been pursuing him most summers in the last sort of 3-4 years. Although I'm not sure now he's approaching 30 why their interest would still be so keen. Especially as they aren't in the best financial position as well, right? Which is why I don't really get this move from a financial perspective either. A lot of papers are saying they need to offload fringe players. Arthur Melo's not really established himself as an integral part of the side since that 31 million euro move from Gremio, although he's shown flashes of brilliance, particularly in that 4-2 victory over Tottenham at Wembley, where he was just absolutely superb, and had it not been for Lionel Messi, would have stole the show. But yeah, selling Arthur Melo because you had to take out a loan on Griezmann doesn't, and then bringing in Pjanic for probably similar money or marginally less, doesn't really make sense, particularly when Arthur Melo's probably on more modest wages than his peers at Barcelona, let's say. So firstly, I wanted to debunk that angle, that they're doing it for financial reasons, because I imagine Pjanic is on 100 plus K a week at Juventus and would demand the same at Barcelona. And secondly, they think they're getting the inferior player. Pjanic still is an extremely good creator. He's become less important to Maurizio Sarri in the current system. We saw a few weeks ago before football was suspended how well Bentancur, Ramsey and Matuidi worked in a midfield three against Inter Milan. They were absolutely fantastic, sort of Matuidi and Ramsey as those roaming eights, and Bentancur really holding the fort in CDM. I think he's a supremely talented player that will really come to the fore as well. And yeah, Pjanic has sort of gone from being, creator in chief to not a spare part, because he's still picking up a lot of minutes, he's still playing a lot of games, but it doesn't look like he features in Maurizio Sarri's long-term vision for Juventus. And if they get Arthur Melo, who is, I think, a superior 8, he has a higher ceiling at the very least, to sort of Rabiot, Matuidi, Ramsey, then they're getting a 23-year-old who could grow in stature and really anchor that midfield for the next 5-10 years. I mean, they have got a gluttonous amount of talent, haven't they? If there's one team out of these two that does need to shed some players, it is perhaps Juventus. So Juventus picking up another midfielder again is quite mystifying. But if they can offload Pjanic and get Melo in and save some money, yeah, good for them. This would just be by Barcelona, to be honest. I mean, they've already let Todibo go. They've mishandled another prodigy prior to this. And just to go back to like his numbers, I know his numbers haven't been completely fire at Barcelona after Melo's. He kind of got off to a good start, didn't he? He's shown himself to be a very competent passer, sort of averaging 50 passes a game, around a 90% pass accuracy. He's also shown himself to be an extremely competent dribbler on 2.6 dribbles per 90. And I think he completes a very high percentage of them as well. I think that's around the 80% mark. So he's elite in a couple of regards, but his defensive contribution has been needs improvement. His contributions in the final third have sort of been a little bit sketchy. I think five deep progressions per game, which is actually better than Matuidi. It's actually better than Rabiot, but not exactly setting the world on fire. So listen, I'll be the first to admit he probably needs to improve on Barcelona at Barcelona. But by the same token, he's also been at Barcelona in quite a tumultuous period where he's not really cemented a position. I think Frankie de Jong should be the long-term heir to Busquets at 6, although he's been a bit more advanced than we're used to this season. And Arthur Melo should be that 8. He's got that Iniesta chop. I love him. I love this player, as you can probably tell by the way I'm ranting about him. I don't know if you boys think this would be as stupid as I do.
I'm with you. I think this doesn't make any sense. It's very Barcelona of the last few years to invest in a 30-year-old when they probably should have done this in 2016 when they first wanted him. I think Luis Enrique, having worked with him at Roma, wanted Pjanic in. Even 2017, 2018 makes sense. I don't think at 30, as you say, with him playing now in central midfield as a sort of regista, it makes sense to get him to compete alongside Frankie de Jong. I think you can just keep Busquets for that. And keep Arta as one of those 8s and invest in the areas where you need to, which seems like a long-term number 9. So I'm completely against this. But then I think he does have his critiques in the Barcelona sort of fraternity about his lack of output. I think it's only 3 goals and 4 assists in about 40 La Liga games, which isn't fantastic. But I feel like goals and assists you can sort of add to a player potentially as they evolve. But he's got all the basics in terms of his passing and dribbling. But Pat, I know you've not been a massive fan of his defensive output in that midfield.
To be honest with you, I think he's been pretty bad at Barcelona. I don't think he's been very impressive at all. He's a good passer, though his passing stats are pretty unimpressive. You know, like Chris said, 50 passes a game. That's not very many for a midfielder at Barcelona. His defensive output as well is not just like it could use improvement. Like, it's shockingly bad. Like 1.2 tackles and interceptions per match is less than you'd expect from a centre forward now in a top league. That to me is just simply not good enough. And yes, he's been a good dribbler this season, but he doesn't create. He's not going to score goals. He's been very lucky to have 6 goal involvements in the league this season. I think XG says he should have about 3. So a lot of that comes down to the fact that the players around him are capable of finishing half chances. On the other hand, he's 23. So if you're Barcelona, I guess you keep him. But if you could get a really great player who's young for him, then I'd be all in favour of it. I mean, if we weren't talking about swapping him for Pjanic and we were talking about swapping him for Rabiot, I'd say go ahead and do it. Rabiot's better than Arthur in every possible way. I mean, he's much more talented than him. Like, he's a better defender, he's a better dribbler, he's a better passer, or at least as good a passer. He's certainly a better creator. So that's somebody that I would kind of understand if Barcelona went for, because then they could play him as a 6 or play him next to de Jong and pretty much rely on the fact that both of them can cover huge amounts of ground, can get the ball forward and can defend. The problem with Artur right now is I just don't really know what his role is. I mean, and while there are other players who actually, when they're shifted between roles, tend to put up pretty big numbers. I mean, Frankie de Jong's been shifted between roles this season and his numbers have gone down, but he's still more impressive than Artur in every way except deep progressions, and he's not far off him there as well, given that he's been playing deeper. I don't know. I just don't really know what he is now. Like, he's obviously not creative. The idea that he's going to like sit deep and pass is fine, but you kind of need that guy to do some defensive work as well, like Xavi did. Like Xavi did a huge amount of defensive work for Barcelona, and nobody really noticed, but he did it. Iniesta got the ball into the final third a lot, and also produced a pretty decent number of key passes quite a lot of the time. Could also pull out wide, could also play deeper and chip in defensively. We just see none of this stuff from Arthur, so I don't really know. I mean, I find him to be like staggeringly unimpressive, and he's one of those guys who's just like, he's nice to watch. That's the best I can say for him. But Barcelona, Chris is absolutely right though, that Barcelona shifting him to getting a 30-year-old feels like they're throwing good money after bad. Like, it feels like they know that they've like wasted a bunch of cash on the Griezmann deal, and so they're like trying to put it right by pursuing other kind of long shot moves which are never going to pay off. Like, Barcelona, if they want to sell an asset, they can definitely find them around the squad. They can lower their asking prices for some of the players they've got in the squad and really shift quite a lot of wages and bring in quite a lot of cash. But instead, we always see these kind of ridiculous moves floated with them, where they're going after like these white whales that they failed with 2 or 3 years ago. You know, next we'll hear them. I'm sure he'll talk about them going after Verratti again. It just makes no sense. Though Verratti would at least be a much smarter long-term signing than Pjanic.
I don't think it's as clear cut. The sort of comparisons with Arthur and Rabiot now. Of course, Rabiot is a couple years older. This is just picking up on your sort of comparison between the two, and Rabiot being far superior. I agree that Arthur has to show a lot more, and probably fairly quickly, to be considered sort of worthy of comparison. And this is based largely off flashes, but Rabiot's not exactly been ripping up trees at Juve. And my current understanding of him, my current sort of the way in which I rate the player is based on his numbers at PSG, to which, you know, that's conflated a lot of players' numbers in the past. And, you know, you could argue that should be the case with Arthur at Barca as well, but I would say they haven't been as dominant in their respective leagues as PSG, and they don't quite pad out, or they've not padded out players' numbers in the same way in the last sort of 18 months in particular. But Rabiot's defensive contribution, I think 2.5 tackles, I think 2.7 tackles, interceptions per 90.
I've got him at 3.7. Which is still triple Arthur.
I've got per game. I've got not per 90 because he's made 6 appearances off the bench, right? He's only made 11 starts. So I don't know if Melo would be better suited to a Sarri system, and it comes down to a question of system here. But Rabiot is not being used to his maximum capacity in Turin. So, I mean, if a swap deal did become available for them and Rabiot was guaranteed minutes at Barca, sure, but I feel like, where would he fit in that current side? I feel like he's best in a double pivot.
I don't know. I mean, he mostly played in a 3 at PSG. I mean, obviously PSG have used a 3 pretty much the last 5-6 years. Like, I don't know. I think that even with him having a down year, his numbers are still better than Arthur across the board. I mean, like, he's still doing about triple the amount of defensive work. His dribbles aren't that far off. He's not doing as much final third entry, but actually that's not his role when you watch them. Whereas when it was his role at PSG, he was doing an awful lot of it the last 2 seasons. Defensively, yeah, like, he's a little bit off his best, but it's still pretty much fine. And passing wise, you know, he completes as many passes per game. Like, I don't know. I just kind of look at Rabiot and I think, I've seen evidence that Rabiot can be a top player in a top 5 league. We're yet to see any evidence that Arthur is better than this. I would love for him to be, but when you look at his numbers from last season, they're not really different from this. They're pretty much the same. In fact, they're the same as this season, but with just fewer dribbles. So, I mean, I kind of look at that and think, well, why am I making the assumption that he can step up defensively? And he can step up defensively not just a little bit, but a lot. Why am I assuming that this guy who's never been a creative force is going to suddenly become one? I'd like to imagine he could, and generally speaking, I'm in favour of keeping younger players and giving them a shot. But with Rabiot, I've seen him be good. You know, with Bentancur, we've seen him be amazing. With Ramsey, we've seen him be good. Like, you can look at those players at Juve and see the role that they have and see why they're suited to those roles, both with the eye and with the numbers. Whereas I look at Arta, and if I want to bring, and if you're going to bring him in at Juve, for money plus Pjanic, I kind of want to know what he's going to be. And frankly, I don't think anybody has any idea, including Barcelona. That's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, we have to trust that. I mean, his pedigree is good in South America. For Gremio, he won the Copa Libertadores, right? And he starred in that competition, and that is sort of what secured him the move. Yeah, but historically, we don't have the same sort of stats to weigh him up against Rabiot that would sort of buy him time in our eyes, I guess. And I think there's players of a similar age who are more dynamic that are probably available to Barcelona right now, or, you know, Barcelona could theoretically move for, like Thomas Partey or like Houssem Aouar, who are sort of more ready to go. But you'd like to think that bringing Arthur from Gremio, that 31 million euro move wasn't going to be deemed a success or a failure on the back of 12 months where they've gone through two managers. So yeah, I think he deserves more time, but yeah, who knows what Barcelona are gonna do, and if Quique Setien will even be there again in a year's time. But back to you, Dougie.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think he definitely deserves more time. But as you both said, he probably does need to step up. And obviously, there's another sort of proposition in this Arta discussion, because Barcelona are supposedly very interested in signing Ndombele, and Spurs are rumoured to want Arta if they sell Ndombele. So who knows where Arta will be at the start of next season, whenever that will be. But an interesting discussion nonetheless. Pat, let's move on to another player who, currently in Italy, in Koulibaly, because there's been talk for about 2 years now about a potential move for Koulibaly, but according to Damasio, he could be going to Spurs.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that this is largely because of Jose Mourinho. I mean, Mourinho obviously wanted Koulibaly when he was at Man United. And now the rumour is that he's still interested. Now he's off to Spurs. Obviously, as well, like, Vertonghen is going to be leaving on a free, in theory, this summer. Toby Alderweireld is 31 years old. Davinson Sanchez hasn't kicked on quite the way they'd like. They've even got issues with Tanganga, whose contract comes to an end at the end of next season. So they're looking at a big turnover defensively, and Damasio says that Koulibaly is somebody that they're talking about. His agents have been discussing the matter apparently with Daniel Levy, which, if we've got to that stage, then it's obviously a serious possibility. Napoli might be willing to sell. Koulibaly is going to be 29 before the end of this season. They paid a lot of money for Kostas Manolas last summer. They brought in Romani on loan from Verona as well. So maybe now would be the time to sell, especially seeing as it seems a couple of clubs might be interested. We've seen him linked with Real Madrid. I don't think that'll happen. We've seen him linked with Everton, I think because of the Ancelotti connection. So if you can maybe start a little bidding war for Koulibaly, it's probably not the worst idea, I think. On the other hand, to me, it just comes down to the price. Like, this season, he's got huge tackles and interception numbers. He's at over 4 a game, which he's never been in that zone. And largely that's because it's difficult, because on the one hand, you want to give him credit for making more tackles and interceptions, but on the other hand, you don't want to penalise him for the fact he was playing in a heavy possession side over the last few years. But then you kind of think, okay, well, one of the reasons he's making lots of tackles and interceptions this season is because Napoli have got a pretty porous midfield right now, have been pretty bad all year, and he's required to do more work. But I think we'd all agree that he's got a really nice, varied skill set. He wins, I think, 80% of the challenges he attempts. He's extremely dominant in the air. He's a very good passer. He plays on the left side of the defence, which is always kind of another 20 to 25 mil on your transfer fee, because people always want left-footed centre-backs and there aren't that many elite ones around. On the other hand, it does seem a bit strange to say, we're going to solve the problem of our ageing defence by signing another ageing defender. But that is kind of how Jose Mourinho likes to solve problems. I've got to be honest, I worry about how much this would cost Spurs to make it a reality. If you're talking about If you're talking about sub 50 million euros, maybe you think about it. Well, really sub 40 million euros, maybe you think about it. But if you're talking about more than that, especially this summer, given the way that their revenue is going to be squeezed by everything, I really don't see how they can justify such an expensive move.
Yeah, I'm with you. If it's £50 million, I think I'd go for it. I think he is an instant improvement on all their current centre-backs, even Alderweireld, despite his improvement under Mourinho since November. But yeah, as you say, will they have the finances in a post-Corona world? It's not quite sure. It's not certain. It's definitely not clear. Especially with that Kane transfer looking harder and harder by the day, in that Levy won't want to sell for under his current valuation, but we're not quite sure where that valuation will be after this crisis. But in Koulibaly's favour, 28 is not young in Jose Mourinho's is not old in Jose Mourinho's eyes for a centre back in any stretch at all. And he does have an excellent injury record. I think prior to this season, he'd only missed 5 games over the preceding 4 seasons. So he's pretty fit. He's had a couple of issues this year. I think he had a bicep and a thigh injury. But
we've all been there, Dookie, mate. Massive bicep injuries.
Yeah, exactly, those dumbbells having their way with us. But yeah, I'd go if it could be done for around 50 million. I think it's a good move. The final move we wanted to discuss in detail concerns another player that's been heavily talked about in Sergej Milinkovic Savic. He's obviously been on the radar for a long time now, and he's supposedly interesting Chelsea, Spurs again, and Man United alongside the European giants of Juventus, Real Madrid and PSG. Basically, I think he's an easy name to fill papers with because everyone's pretty interested with his skill set. He does look like a sort of phenomenal all-round player. Very good defensive output, couple of shots a game, couple of dribbles, over a key pass as well. He kind of reminds me, to watch him play, he's like a very skilled Fellaini, in that his best attributes are sort of his physicality and like ability in the air. And if you push him forward from midfield or playing as a 10, and ping balls long to him, he's really comfortable bringing the ball down in tight areas. And Immobile has, profited off that a lot this year. He's obviously been on the scene for quite a while as well. I think it was at the Under-17 World Cup in 2015 that he first shone. And then has been at Lazio for 4 seasons. Emerged as one of their key men this year in their unlikely title challenge against Juventus. They're only 1 point behind Juve. The only downside is he's not sort of the best passer. So you'd have to use him effectively. As in his pass accuracy is under 80% this year, which isn't great if you wanted to use him in a sort of possession-heavy, controlling side. But somewhere like Man United, with the sort of counter-attacking style they're trying to implement, I think he'd be quite a good option for them. But he's so tied into the future of Pogba. If Pogba leaves Man United, then I think they'll consider Milinkovic Savic, although they should probably go for an out-and-out defensive midfielder. And then if Real Madrid, PSG or Juventus can't sign Pogba, they'll probably look at Milinkovic Savic. So it seems like more of a move that is dependent on Pogba. And he might not want to leave Lazio as well. I mean, he's got a contract until 2024. He's only 25. He's doing pretty well there. He's developed pretty nicely. Maybe he'll want to stick it out. So we'll see about Milinkovic Savic. But we're going to briefly touch on some other moves that could be happening.
Dougie, I think Daniel Levy should take you to the negotiating table, because if you describe him as the Serbian Fellaini, if you manage to convince them of that hypothesis, that takes 20 mil off his price.
Yeah, that halves it instantly. I did feel harsh saying it. It's just his physical style of play. But he's a lot better on the ball than Fellaini, for sure. A much better player with a much better ceiling. But let's briefly touch on some of these other deals. Newcastle's probably, the centre, well, it's one of the main talking points in world football right now. And Coutinho is linked with a move to Newcastle by Mundo Deportivo. Chris, can you see any world where Coutinho swaps playing for Barcelona and currently Bayern for Newcastle?
I mean, my opinions on this takeover will probably become clear as the weeks go on. I'm sort of biting my tongue for now, until something a little bit more with more validity happens. I wouldn't like necessarily to see this takeover happen. I'm sure some Newcastle fans would disagree, especially when they're linked with players like Coutinho and managers like Pochettino. I think they would have to, if the takeover went through, they would have to probably take the same approach as Manchester City when they first were first financed by the Abu Dhabi group, right? In that they were signing players who weren't quite, of that level. They were sort of expensive B tier sort of players, or kind of players whose star had fallen. And Robinho springs to mind. They were signing sort of Negredo for big money, weren't they? As well as, I'm not going to go through the names under the sort of Mark Hughes administration, but yeah, I don't think they would be able to attract that caliber of player just on the premise that they can pay them whatever. Because I still think, with Coutinho, for example, he is 27, 28. It hasn't worked for him at two big clubs. He will feel like these are, he wants to play his remaining peak years at a top club, not help turn round the fortunes of a sort of flailing, English, I don't want to say giant, but so no. Not a great answer from me. I'm not going to lie, but I don't think Coutinho will happen, and they'll probably be signing expensive second-tier players for the next sort of 2 to 3 years and slowly building towards names like that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want Coutinho to move there as well. I think Coutinho is almost a victim of his own transfer fee. I think Barcelona are asking for 110 million at the end of this Bayern loan to make it permanently. Now, if that was 60, 70, I think a lot of clubs would be interested. But I can't actually see Coutinho moving if it is that price to anywhere. So I'm not quite convinced on this. And he's clearly a very good player. I mean, he's got 17 goal contributions in 32 appearances for Bayern Munich this season. Bayern just don't want to pay over 100 million for him. Pat, this is one concerning Arsenal. Sergio Reguilon is being linked with Arsenal. What do you make of this? I mean, wouldn't you just have almost too many left-backs?
Well, there's talk that we'd let Kolasinac go this summer. Like he's been interesting a few Italian clubs, and I actually think that would probably be quite a good move for him. I was actually just writing about Inter Milan and how I think that they should be looking for another left wing back, a slightly younger one. I think Kolasinac would probably fit them quite nicely. So yeah, if somebody like that were to go out, we'll probably bring in another player. On the other hand, I'm not sure that it's going to make either Reguilon or Tierney happy if you bring in somebody of Reguilon's age, because it says it makes it very unclear who's going to be first choice. They're both going to want to be first choice. So one way or another, you've definitely got a player who's miserable. Probably you've got two players who are not as happy as they should be. I don't think Arsenal have the money to do this summer. Truly, I think they're going to have to sell forwards to buy forwards. They need at least one midfielder. That's where they've been heavily linked with making additions. Whether they can get in another centre-back, I don't really know. Though actually, I suppose there are good people available. Like Malong Sa is available on a free this summer. That'd be interesting. I don't see Arsenal freeing up 25 to 30 million for a player in a position where they just spent 25 million last year on a guy who's very young and extremely promising. Like Reguilon is a fantastic player. Would I love to have him at Arsenal? Yes. But do I need him when we've got Kieran Tierney there? No, not at all. I'm perfectly happy to let Kieran Tierney use these months where the game is shut down to come back to full fitness. Arsenal have actually got kind of lucky in that regard, that they can let Kieran Tierney get back to the fitness that they want from him. But to be honest, in very limited minutes, Tierney's been extremely impressive for Arsenal. I don't know. It would be odd. It's a luxury move, and Arsenal are no longer a luxury club.
Yeah, and other priorities this summer, namely what's going to happen with Aubameyang, Lacazette, Ozil, etc. So, yeah, other priorities, I'd agree with you. The final move I briefly wanted to touch upon was quite a weird one, I thought. Sport are claiming that Man City are considering letting João Cancelo leave in exchange for Nelson Semedo. To me, this just doesn't really make sense because although they're the same age, I think Semedo is only 6 months older. Becoming a fullback in Pep Guardiola's system seems to take everyone a fair bit of time to get used to. I think to be a fullback, it's the hardest position to play, arguably, in Pep's system. Now, why would you swap João Cancelo, who admittedly hasn't been great or anywhere near as good as we thought he was going to be, for Nelson Semedo and just delay that integration process? I'm not so sure. João Cancelo can also play at left back as well, which gives you a bit of flexibility. And yeah, he hasn't been great this year. I think he's only been trusted with about 8 Premier League starts, but don't throw all that work away to get Nelson Semedo in, who's the same age and I don't think is really an upgrade. And Kyle Walker still seems in quite good state to go on for another year. So again, Man City, you've got issues at centre-back. I wouldn't waste your time swapping out your right-backs. But guys, that's all we've got time for our first section. Let us know what you guys thought about our shock potential transfers in the comment section below. And let's move on to Quickfire Questions. Our Quickfire question comes in from @FreeAns this week, and they have asked, which football result hurt you the most? Chris, have you had any tears watching Celtic? Or maybe any other club?
What do you mean, have I had any tears? Every time we get to the knockout stage in European competition, it's tears. Like against Copenhagen this year, where we were comprehensively the better side away from home. You think Celtic's mentality in Europe is bounced back. You know, it was very resolute under Strachan. We had our moments under Brendan, and then this year with Neil Lennon, or this season even, we beat Lazio home and away. Get a favourable draw in the Europa, and then crash out to an extremely average Copenhagen side at Celtic Park, which historically, we've been very good at, although in the modern era, not so much. The 3-1 loss to, was it Mulder? I think it might have been Mulder. I don't know. It escapes me in a minute. Springs to mind. So yeah, that game against Copenhagen, the most recent bit of heartache. Zenit St. Petersburg under Brendan, losing 2-0 away from home after winning 1-0 at home was pretty heartbreaking. We didn't really turn up there, wasn't very competitive. And obviously the UEFA Cup final, it was then in 2003. It's the first time I've cried at a football match. Just the look of Henrik Larsson going past the trophy at the end it's just still emblazoned on my mind, mate. 2 goals in the final, 2 outstanding headers as well, and we went a man down in extra time. I've still never watched that final back. No.
Really? A lot of heartache for Hamill. Pat, what about you? What's your most painful football memory?
I guess I should say the Champions League final, but yeah, because I'd say that it's not the games where you got battered, but it's the games where you got robbed that are the most painful. And I think in that game, we were the better side despite being a man down against Barcelona. Were pretty poor. The only player who had a good game for them was Henrik Larsson, who was a sub. So I mean that's pretty rough. But the 8-2 against Man United didn't annoy me as much as when we went out of the Champions League to Monaco, where we were the better team against them in both legs and somehow went out on away goals. I remember after the first leg they were crowing about how perfectly their plan worked. And when I watched it back, I was like, we had 15 big chances in that game and just missed them. And they were like, our plan worked perfectly, which is apparently to give us big chances and hope we'd miss them. And Monaco were really smug about that for a while. That was annoying.
Good use of crowing.
Yeah, it's disgusting behaviour. They did it against Spurs as well, and Man City, where they were like, our plan worked perfectly. And I was like, you were the inferior team in all 3 of these 2-legged fixtures and just got lucky every time. Well done. The World Cup final in 2010 was pretty rough as well, because the Dutch had kind of mortgaged their principles in order to get there. And then when it didn't, and then the final was so dispiriting generally. It was such a horrible game to watch. It was so boring. Spain were awful. The Netherlands were worse. It was just dreadful. That was. So yeah, but I don't know. Generally, it's the games where you think, when you were on top all game and you had 30 shots and you were absolutely battering someone and you somehow contrived to draw or lose. Those are the ones that really stick in your heart. So losing 3-1 to Man United a couple of years ago at the Emirates when we absolutely pummeled them. Those games are irritating. Whereas the games where we were just playing a side that was infinitely better than us, I'm kind of yeah, I mean, we obviously got robbed against Barcelona quite a lot of times, but it wasn't so much that I thought we should have won the game. It was more that I was just so sick of seeing their players not get sent off. Even when we played them a couple of years ago in the Champions League at the Emirates, Jordi Alba headbutted Olivier Giroud really obviously just in front of the linesman, and he didn't even get a talking to. And I was like, that's just the sort of stuff that makes you think, what's the point, man?
Playing against big sides, and they managed to win through implementing the dark arts more successfully than you. Like Barcelona, like you said, have been guilty of it a few times in the past.
Real Madrid do it as well. Like just those like Real Madrid doing it against Bayern Munich. That Real Madrid beating Bayern Munich, when Ancelotti was at Bayern, when like Ronaldo, they scored like 3 offside goals. And Vidal got sent off and Casemiro didn't. Like, even that pissed me off more than most Arsenal results, just because I was like, if the rules don't apply to everyone, like, what is the point of this game? It's just annoying.
I remember another game that annoyed me with similar opposition at a Celtic game was when Celtic lost in the last 16 at Celtic Park to Juventus. And Celtic should have been probably awarded 2 penalties from corners, and it was just like catenaccio. I remember Fergie saying that Italian teams make you feel like the best side in the world and beat you 3-0. And I remember just looking at this futile brand of football, this winning brand of football, and thinking, f*** off.
Yeah, I completely understand. But it's just like, I when you think about games that hurt you, like, I hate Chelsea more than any club in the world almost. But I think about Chelsea losing that game to Barcelona, the one where Drogba was after the game saying it was a disgrace. And it genuinely makes me angry on Chelsea's behalf. Like, it's just not right. But, I've remembered another one. A couple of years ago, I was at the first leg of Arsenal's Europa League semi-final against Atletico Madrid at the Emirates. And we went 1-0 up through a Lacazette header. And they were horrible all game, Atletico Madrid. They were like a pub side. It was like when we used to play like Wigan or something. I was genuinely shocked at how bad they were. And then the ball just got hoofed long in the last minutes of the game. It wasn't even an attack. And Koscielny tried to clear it, but like he was kind of falling over it, and he kind of like hoofed it, sort of overhead kicked it, but hoofed it against himself. And like Griezmann was just able to go through and like score like solo and just score. And it wasn't like good attacking play that created it. They'd done nothing all game, and he just got that goal. And then they ended up going through and winning the Europa League. And if we'd gone through, we would have played a pretty rubbish Marseille side in the final and probably have got back in the Champions League. So that was irritating just because I was like, it's not right. They didn't do anything good. It was garbage.
Forgot Marseille were in that final.
Oh, it was crap. Yeah, that was bullshit. But I mean, Arsenal just like, they should make you impervious to harm after a while, because they're just like the stop hitting yourself of football clubs. Like, they just constantly like inflict damage on themselves. So,
Doogie, I've been trying to think of a way to ask you this question without sounding condescending, and I've not figured it out, so you're just going to have to come in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, talking about hitting yourself, let's get on to Sunderland. So last May, we somehow made it to the League One playoff final, despite playing pretty atrociously from January. Sold our best player in January, limped into the playoffs, played really well in the semis, and I booked a trip to go see my brother in New York, who lives there. Didn't realise that it was going to be on League One final day, assuming that we wouldn't need it because we were in League One for the first time in however many years. And we go ahead within 15 minutes, play phenomenally well for the first 60, and then completely collapse, like go into our shell. They score. Then with minutes to go, they score again from a back post error from one of our centre backs, and we're out. Like a 44 game season. 46 game season, all comes down to that minute, and you lose in the last minute for the second time at Wembley that season after losing on penalties to Portsmouth in the Checkatrade Trophy final. Like, it was a horrific, and it ruined my trip to New York, quite frankly, as well, because it was in the middle of the 3 days we were there, and it's very difficult to recover from something like that. I remember going up to Top of the Rock afterwards to look at the Empire, whatever that, I couldn't even take it in, whatever building, the State Building, and I was just in the most miserable mood I've ever been in. And I'd got my family to all come and watch it rather than take a boat trip to the Statue of Liberty. So I'd completely ruined the trip for Sunderland. And it really backfired. So yes, that was very, very painful, as you can tell from my little rant. But that was a very detailed response from all of us about the amount of pain we've experienced through football. Make sure you get your most painful moments in the comment section down below. And that's all we've got time for on Continental Club for this week. Mr. Hamill, what should they go and do now?
We Need to Talk will be live on Football Daily, so go and check that bad boy out. We also have been regularly uploading the Extra Time podcast to Football Daily, and it is growing and growing, so obviously more and more of you are switching onto that, and that'll be hosted by Pat. Pat, can you give him a sneak preview what it'll be on tomorrow? Or, sorry, it doesn't go live Saturdays now, but next week's?
Next week's, I think it's going to be me and Doogie. And we're going to be talking about the fact that given that clubs are going to have a very limited amount of money in the forthcoming transfer window, how you could improve your squad using some budget buys, some free transfers. It might be quite interesting. Like maybe how you could turn a club into a Champions League side using some of the free and cheap players around Europe.
Cash in the Attic episode of Extra Time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, nice.
Love it. Should be good. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.